What is Gaster? Well, we know he was the royal scientist in Undertale, had some incident where he fell into something he made, speaks in Wingdings, is connected to Sans in some way, and is also heavily present in Deltarune. But I'm not asking who Gaster is from a story perspective. I mean, we hardly know anything about him other than the things I mentioned, and I'm honestly not interested in speculating about what he's going to do in Deltarune, or if he's a skeleton or whatever. No, I'm more interested in what his existence means thematically to both Undertale and Deltarune. So what does Gaster mean? We have very little information about Gaster himself, so it's difficult to make any thematic analysis based on him as a character, save for the few lines said in game from the Gaster followers and from himself. But luckily, I think there's a lot more information we can garner about Gaster based on how we interact with Gaster as a player. So how does a typical player learn or interact with Gaster in Undertale and Deltarune? Well, they don't, not really anyways. In Undertale, Gaster as a concept is extremely difficult to learn about. For you to even get any mention of him in-game, you have to get extremely lucky. At the beginning of a playthrough, the game sets a random value from 0 to 100, and depending on what number you get a special event that happens in-game. Of these possible events, only 4 of them actually mention Gaster by name, and because you get only one fun value per playthrough, to get all the information around Gaster naturally would take forever. Of course, some people just went into the files and manipulated the code to get these events. And that brings me to the next way players interact with Gaster, data mining. A ton of information we know about Gaster is found in the game's files. Like that he's associated with the number 6 through the fun values, and that Sans is somehow related to the sprite name of the guns being called Gaster Blasters. And then there's the famed entry number 17, where we learn Gaster speaks in the Wingdings typeface, and that he is experimenting with darkness and the noise in the background that connects him to Deltarune. There's another way to learn about Gaster, and that's through the internet or word of mouth. I think most people found out about Gaster this way. They're watching YouTube videos about Undertale and Deltarune, or reading about the game's secrets on social media. Basically, what I'm getting with all of this is that for a player to know about Gaster, you have to really search for him, to a point where you have to look in game files and manipulate code to learn everything about him, or by actively reading or watching about the game. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't know who Gaster is. And the point I'm trying to make here is that the actions you have to take to learn about Gaster is the reason Gaster exists in the first place. To explain what I mean, I first have to talk about Kara. When I say Kara, I'm not talking about the character Kara, you know, the one who fell down in 21X and was adopted by the Dreamer family. No, I'm talking about the end of genocide root Kara, the representation of the player's actions that led them there. Yes, they're not the same character, and I'm not going to get into that can of worms right now. For now, when I'm talking about Kara, I'm talking about what end of genocide means, and what that says about the player. Okay, so what does Kara mean exactly? Well, it's spelt out pretty directly to you at the end of genocide, saying they are the feeling when a number goes up. Basically, Kara represents how the player distance themselves from the game to be able to do genocide root in an attempt to do everything content-wise. Kara is essentially a commentary on how we interact with video games. And for the player to even interact with Kara, it's the actions that led up to them that bring meaning to what Kara is saying, and I think it's a similar situation with Gaster. See, a player doesn't just do the genocide route in Undertale without a reason. I don't think it's a reach to say that when most people first play Undertale, they either do a pacifist or neutral route, trying to play the game in earnest and do whatever they think is right for the characters. But once the game is over, if the player really liked the game, they naturally want more. More of the writing, more of the characters, more content. And so, either because they learned the route from other players, or naturally discovered it by trying new things they haven't done before, they end up playing through the genocide route. And it's through this perverted sentimentality that one ends up here. And I think that this same warped sense of love is what causes us to go into the code, to go looking at unused sprites and rooms and dialogue, to know everything there is to know about the game. And this is what I think Gaster means. I interpret Gaster as a character as one motivated by knowledge. Most of the dialogue we get from Gaster comes from Deltarune, and I read it as him being generally a neutral observer. He only ever asks the player questions and doesn't seem to care what answers we give. Sure, he will give his feelings on some things, calling certain characters wonderful or interesting, but he doesn't actually interfere with anything. During game overs, he asks if we'll persist or give up. He doesn't care if we give up, which leads to the end of the world. I mean, if he doesn't care about that, then he's pretty apathetic towards the actual world of Deltarune. He just seems interested to see what will happen. In Undertale, Gaster was a scientist. What he did or made, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that he was very interested in something relating to darkness, which is probably related to dark worlds in some way. I believe he was a man with a desire for knowledge, and because of this he fell into his creation, shattering throughout all of time and space. He might have got what he wanted. After all, he must know everything that has or ever will be, being spread out throughout time and space like that, but perhaps at the cost of connections with others. I can't think of a further way of distancing yourself from others other than dying, which he arguably already might be. This interpretation of Gaster is what I think he represents to the players who interact with him. To know Gaster, you have to pick apart the game, learn about the mechanics, look at files and code, know everything about the game, but perhaps at the cost of further distancing yourself from the characters and game you love. I mean, if you know how the inner workings of the game operate, and know how the code functions, isn't your suspension of belief shattered? Your desire to do something in the game led to Kara, and your desire to know everything led to Gaster. To know Gaster means becoming Gaster in a way.